That's why we're here tonight. So I want to talk about 3 words that I believe that most white people fear losing: privilege, power, and position. Privilege, power. So what do you do with that? You do Exodus chapter 1. You put hard taskmasters over them. You afflict them. You mandate that they build houses without stones. You make it rough for them so that I can maintain my privilege, so that I can maintain my power, and so that I can maintain my position in life. All right, Darrell, what's your thought on this? And then if you want to chat, we'll try to, because we want to have real, not just the problem. How do we fix this? What can we do on our end to give some relief to this serious fear that white people have of us?
Oh, it's so many things there that you said, Bishop. And, you know, I think the first thing that I would start with is that we are dealing with a social, political, economic, legal structures and systems that are so ingrained in American society that it's almost impossible to talk about America without talking about race. Race is the most powerful narrative in American thought. It is what makes America America. I mean, people say what makes us great is all these other things. What makes America America is the racial history of America. It was built and based in racial oppression. And this, before we get to that, this goes beyond just Black people, as it were. I mean, this land was stolen from an entire ethnicity of people who were here and were thriving. And then, of course, there's transatlantic slave trade, the slave trade. And that has permeated into every structure. So now when we come to the place, fast forward 400 years, where we begin to talk about Uncle Ben's rice and Aunt Jemima's syrup, and even the use of the word master bedroom as it concerns how we sell homes. The things that we thought were innocuous and harmless, we realize that race is ingrained in every single structure. We don't even have to get to the overt things like police brutality. We don't even have to talk about, mass incarceration yet. I mean, those are the overt things, but there's so much subtlety to it and subversion. So to kind of come to your question of why do they fear us? Well, look, if you spent all your time poking at a bear, you'd be scared of the bear too. We have been mistreated. We have been agitated. We have been consistently and systematically oppressed. And so there is a thinking in white consciousness that we've sown the wind, the whirlwind is coming. The question is just when and how. If I could take it back, Nate Turner, they did a great movie on him recently called Birth of a Nation, which, by the way, was an ironic twist on the first Birth of a Nation, which was the first colored movie that was ever made in color. Back in the early 1900s, which was the history of the KKK. But this was a replay, and it was a retelling of the story of Nate Turner, a person who was, because I want to get away from saying a slave. He was a person who was enslaved, who was a pastor, and right under their noses, he was planning and plotting a rebellion. And there's something in every, how do I say it? Because I don't want to offend people, but I'm just going to say, I think there's something within first white power structures and almost within every white person that fears the Nate Turner in me and you. Kind of not knowing how do you really feel? Because again, Nate Turner was so good. He was so good. He talked their language. He spoke what they spoke. He preached their Bible. And when I say their Bible, I don't mean their scripture, because we've already established that there's a difference between the scripture, the word of God, and the manipulation. But he knew how to teach and talk their language, so he was appeasing to them. And what scared them is that it made them wonder how many others feel the same way. And, you know, Bishop, I heard somebody say that, you know, I was watching a documentary and he was being a little bit facetious, but it was some truth to it. He said, I think people would be surprised, white people would be surprised to know how 90% of Black people are angry. They're angry about injustice. They're angry about unequal access to fair rights. They're angry about everyday life. They're angry about what they're seeing around us. And the rest of them are really ticked off. So I think that there's this thinking of, and if I could just say this and then I'm done with this. I remember when I shared some comments on social media, sort of about this and how I felt. And there were people who had an issue, people that I knew from law school at Harvard. There were also some people that I went to school with in Virginia, because I went to a school in Virginia that, while majority Black, the structure, the city was definitely majority other. And they wrote me and said, we never thought you thought like that. And I'm like, well, you never asked. So I think it was that fear that, you know, you know how to talk our language and you went to these schools and we thought you were like us, but yet and still I have a voice. And when they heard the voice, see, they don't mind us sitting at the table, they just don't want to hear the voice.
Let me ask you this. Why is this so hard of a subject for even, I'm finding, Black people? Because I get a lot of pushback.
Oh, about to go. Uh-oh, Bishop.
And I'm for the cause. And I want to know, because is it a conditioning? Why was it so hard for people to hear Dr. Martin Luther King, to hear Malcolm X, to hear those who are for the cause? Our people. So we're defending you. We're standing up for you, but this is a hard conversation for you. Now, I understand why white people have the issue with it, but let's go where we take some responsibility. Why is it that it's very difficult for most of us to, in your opinion, to have this? If we were having prayer, it'd be a different story.
No, oh, absolutely.
But now that we're having a tough conversation, it's the numbers are different. So I need you, because I'm really, as I lift up my voice, as I speak truth to power, the pushback that I get is from our people, our Christian people.
Bishop,
I need some help understand that, because I'm really,
you about to open up a whole nother
degree. I'm troubled with that. But here's the thing: we can sit under and support white racists easily.
Oh yeah.
We can give our money
to
white racists who have told us to get over it. But when one of us comes to speak truth, not just me, to speak truth to power for the purpose of liberation and freedom, we get pushback from our own people. I'm gonna let you go, but to me, that's a psychological conditioning issue. Is kind of like master, we sick.
I was just about, well, this is our house.
Right.
This is our house. So Bishop, you talk about a lot of things there. When you start talking about the disturbing and systematic racial structures in this country, understand that did not just condition white folks. It conditioned Black folks too. I would encourage people to, most people have heard of the Willie Lynch letter, most haven't read it. I would encourage people to read it. 1712, Willie Lynch wrote a letter to the folks in Virginia. He said, look, he was from the West Indies. He said, y'all having too many problems with your slaves. They're having rebellions. They're fighting against you. In some cases, you're scared to even go to sleep for what they're going to do. And so he wrote a letter to teach them how, what he called, to break a man and make a slave. And he compared it to how you break the horse. He said, you don't break the horse in the original generation. That generation's always going to be wild, okay? The key is to do enough at the original generation that the original generation teaches the subsequent generations inferiority, servility.
Subconsciously. Subconsciously.
subconsciously,
Subconsciously.
subconsciously, and even through some cases, so that we may be teaching
Unconsciously, but
subconsciously, but intentionally teaching. Maybe,
intentionally. Right.
yes, yes. Because again, so when we start talking about why the pushback comes, because the truth of the matter is, so many of us are we see success as being identified with them. I'm gonna just put it like it is.
Ooh.
So because
Ooh.
you couldn't wait to go to this. How many people feel like success is working in their schools, working in their buildings and going to their schools? And somebody might be watching me now and say, well, you went to Harvard, Darrell. Yeah, I went there, but I don't count my identity in that. See, that's the difference.
Wait a minute, go back.
I don't count my identity in that.
Wait a minute, Darrell, go back. You said something that I can't go past. You said one of the reasons that many of us get pushed back is because we equate our success
Yes.
with their identity. And let me tell you where I saw that and even fell into it.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, this is good. Ooh. Mm-hmm. We need to put this on TV. Find out if we can put this kind of discussion on TV. There was a movement called Word of Faith. And the pioneers of that were white. Mm-hmm. Well, those of us that wanted to come out and start an independent word-based church, most of us in the beginning, till we woke up, got rid of our choirs, got rid of the gospel sound, because to be successful, I had to do it like Hagin did it, or Copeland did it. And one of the things nobody talks about is Fred Price's awakening. Nobody talks about that in the church anymore. That in 1990, after serving Hagin for 20 years, giving him tens and tens of thousands. Can you see me?
You're a little bit, yeah.
A little bit. I don't know what this life. After tens and tens of thousands of dollars, right? Tens of thousands. And you know the issue. His son says that it's caught on a tape by a guy I know in California. He catches it on the tape where the son of Hagin says, we don't marry them. We play with them, talking about blacks, but we don't marry them. So Fred Price, thinking he was a son, right? I never have. Okay. Fred Price, thinking he was a son, goes to his father and says, you got to say something about this. This has to be addressed. Now, if it was real relationship, you received that.
Oh, yeah.
He writes him a letter. See, he writes him a letter saying, I do not answer my critics. So wait a minute. Now I'm a critic? Because I say you got to deal with the racism that has come out of your son's mouth? But wait a minute. Let's go deeper. Nobody talks about the fact that Fred Price thought and modeled white ministry and did not, come on, and I know that's everybody's boy, but I just gotta, if I can't say it right, I ain't gonna say it. And at that time, did not recognize black leadership, did not think we had it together, did not think that we were excellent. But like I said at the beginning of this, sometimes it takes you being a victim of racism.
Of course.
To understand it. Wait a minute, I'm gonna let you. So here's the end result. So he preaches this whole 3-month series that shakes the nation, breaks off from Hagin, calls a big division. But here's my point. Finally address the subject after years of doing like many of us are doing now, giving the pushback to anything that wasn't mixed, gave the pushback until he became. And a lot of us, without all due respect, we're not going to really take this serious until we, unfortunately, become victim and say, you know what? They wasn't just blowing smoke. This the real deal. Go ahead.
But that's the power of conditioning, though. I mean, when you start talking about conditioning, you do it without even thinking. I mean, go back to, what is it? The dog, Pavlov's dog. You know the whole story. That's where we get the term of conditioning from. They rung the bell. They gave the dog meat. So eventually, the dog began to associate the meat, the bell, with food. That even when the meat was taken away, the dog still would salivate because it had been conditioned. And so many of us have been conditioned to think white is better. We've been conditioned to that. That goes beyond the church. That's far beyond that. That goes into when we're talking about this now, we're going into politics. We're going into academia. We're going into professional. I mean, one of the things that I respect about the Jewish community is there's no shame in them going to some of the best schools and then they say, oh, I'm going to work for my father afterwards. No, we don't do that for the most part because we feel like that's small fries, that's small potatoes. And so many of our dreams was to work for Lehman Brothers and work for the big banks and work for these huge firms. And then you look up and they're gone.
Yes.
So I think what we have to do is begin to address the fact that we're dealing with a level of conditioning that has to change. We're dealing with a thinking that's so deeply ingrained. Why is it that we typically, so let me get back to your thing about the pushback. For so long, we were taught not to bother white folks that we get more uncomfortable in some cases than they do when we have these conversations.
Yes.
Because we want to protect. No, but that's a good person. No. This isn't about people. This is about systems that have to be dealt with. This is about systems. And I think we've sometimes got to get out of our own way. We sometimes get into this sense of, well, that person is different. That person might be different. I told you I did a whole Facebook series on how the white evangelical Christian movement has never been on the side of equality. Never, since the beginning of this country's founding. Of course, there were some folks saying, well, this pastor and this is pastor. I'm not talking about your specific pastor. I'm not talking about your specific pastor. Of course, I know that there are some white pastors and white evangelical pastors that have been on the side of change. I am talking about a system right now. So I think for us to really get serious, we've got to understand that it has not just affected them. The worst thing they said that you can do is teach your people to hate someone else. They said, oh, wait a minute, check that. The worst thing you can do is teach your people to hate themselves. And so,
go ahead.
Well, I'll just say some of what we're dealing with is self-hate. I know we don't like to think of it that way, but some of it is not. And I'll just say this, and I don't say that just, for some of us, you know, you think because they threw you a white woman and a few dollars that you have equality. That was your dream. And
ask O.J. Simpson. I'm just.
It's the truth.
If we're going to talk about it, we got to talk about it. I did something today on a podcast because in trying to come up with answers and solutions, I have been asking God and asking myself, where do we go after this? Over the last 3 months, we've been in the streets. There's been mayhem. And I would have to say it was spirit because I wasn't thinking in this direction. And I believe it was dropped in my spirit before we go anywhere. And this is what you just said. We must agree to unify. Because no matter what we do, if it's economic empowerment, if it's leveraging political power, and we stay as divided as we are, we still gonna roll back the time. So my thing is this, and I wrote something, where's it at? I wrote something down, and that was what my entire podcast was about today, about coming out of exclusivity as a people
Hmm.
and coming into the tribal, the community, the us. That's where they get us. They don't get us by just the killing of King. They don't get us just by the killing of Malcolm X.
That's right.
They get us when they are, and I go into this in the podcast, allowed to put moles in the midst of unity to cause division.
Uh-huh.
And I'll say it, and this is going to be the next train I jump on, okay? Because I think that what's going on in the street, I can begin to see it waning a little bit, although there's been effectiveness. And I think we got to ask the question, okay, what's next? I know there's some blackouts taking place beginning tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing I want to tell, I feel from my part, is that if we do not become determined to stick together, it will never work. And I mean that. You can do your thing in the corner. I can do my thing in the corner. Right. Pastor Madeline can do her thing in the corner. Sharice can do her thing in the corner. Everybody in this Zoom, we can do our little bitty thing in the corner. They don't mind that.
Yeah.
You're not a threat. I'm not a threat. We are a threat.
Really.
See, and that's what I'm not hearing from our leaders that say, okay, here's what we got to do. We got to come out of our corners of exclusivity, of saying that if you're not of my clique. Yeah. See, here's the thing, and y'all know me. I cannot hold this stuff back because it's got to be said. We got to learn to work with people we don't particularly like, and that's been our issue. We don't know because we are emotional. And so, Darrell, you could be bringing the sauce to the game. But if I don't like you, I'm a blackball you. So now what you brought that could progress me, I'm missing now. Because I wasn't mature enough to understand there's some people I got to work with that they don't like me. That's right. I don't like them necessarily, but it's about the cause. It ain't about who we like. And until we get to that place, Dr. King, you know, people talk about King. Most people didn't even study King because the things I hear, Dr. King, a lot of people Dr. King didn't care for. A lot of people, but Dr. King was bigger than his feelings. Dr. King was about the cause. There's a lot of people that didn't like Dr. King, but they work with Dr. King because they know Dr. King had the voice.
That's right.
And all I'm saying, I don't care what we tear up. I don't care what we break.
That's right.
If we, after all of this,
that's right,
and it starts on a grassroots level. Now, like, check this out. This is taking place on a national level. We're going to see how unified we stay when it comes to the local and the state level.
That's right.
People I know, people that know me.
Mm-hmm.
See, that's a difference. And I know this is a tough conversation for us because we are by nature exclusive. We are cliques. If I don't know you, if you're not familiar with me, and we see it in the church, we see it in our jobs, we see it. And I said all this in my podcast today. Sometimes you wonder why people are small and they should be big. They're not small because the devil. They're small because of their small-mindedness of being exclusive.
That's right.
The people that grow, the movements that grow are tribal. Now, let me read this, and then I'm gonna let you jump in. But I had to bring this in because I see this wave of anger for many reasons, not stopping, but I see it leveling off. Let me put it that way. So we have to ask the thing for intelligent people, Sharice, what's the next thing? And then before even with the blackout, it ain't gonna work. Some of us doing it, some of us ain't. Some people saying, I ain't doing it in her group. This is the kind of thing, I got something shocking I wanna read, and it may not be shocking, but it may be affirmation of what I'm saying. I think it's more than anything, it's an affirmation of what I'm saying. Let me pull something up for you real quick. Darrell, jump in there if you want to say something while I'm looking for this.
Yeah,
This
I mean, I was
thing
just
about
saying,
unity, this thing about undying
absolutely.
unity.
Well, it's all about, I mean, the only way great change is going to happen is through networks. I mean, the Bible's clear on that. Two's better than one, and a threefold cord can't easily be broken. But I would suggest to you as well, we got to come out from among them. That's going to be the first step. We gotta come out from among them. And I mean them, I mean this identification with systems, things, and stuff that don't mean us no good. So I get the whole blackout, but if you're gonna go and buy a Gucci belt next week, you might as well just go ahead and buy it on the day of the blackout.
Right.
Stop buying and putting your money in brands and things that have nothing to do with you. What is your black butt doing wearing Gucci anyway? I think some of this stuff is like, we got to address that, because we're so caught up in the look of being rich and the look of the things that they have, that until we recognize that, wait a minute, there's power in our authenticity. There's power in just being who I am. I think that's when we can truly begin to, like you said, we have to begin to understand the key is the tribe. That's what they're trying to do, create.
I can't pull it up now, but I'm going to paraphrase it. Everybody knows who J. Edgar Hoover was.
Of course.
He was over the FBI. He tormented, tore up the Black Panther Party, really afraid of Huey Newton, the Nation of Islam, even King's Movement. Here's what I wanted to mention. While we pushing back on our own leadership, while we pushing back on people that's fighting for us, Hoover was asked a question, and he said, our job is to, any movement, any religion, and you can Google this, any sect, any group that fights against government, to agitate them. Then he goes on to say, divide them, turn them against. Now this ain't Willie, this Hoover. Turn them against. And so my thing is, the oldest trick in the book is divide and conquer.
Of course.
And it's still working. And this is, and I know I sound like a broken record, this is all I'm saying. We can have all the strategy, because, I was for strategy until this thing dropped in my spirit and God began to show me. And then he gave me some scriptures. And I explained this whole thing on my podcast today. He said, a house divided, that's a principle.
Come on. Against
itself will not stand. That's number one. But the greater one I went into is Genesis chapter 11. When they begin to operate in the spirit of one voice,
that's right,
one language.
Mm-hmm.
The Bible says clearly, and it's a principle, there was nothing restrained.
That's right.
So the fear is, according to Hoover, one of the fears is that we're going to unify.
Yeah.
And we got to know that that's the fear, and guard against the fears that I'm going to turn against you. The fear is if they keep talking like this, if those two keep talking like this and building momentum and people hear their voice, then they're going to, as Hoover said, set off something to come against the system. So here it is. So what I got to do is send somebody either I respect, let me break it down, or you respect, to cause a division. Mm-hmm. See? That's what we don't see. We see the obvious enemies. We see the white man, but do we see us? See, that's why I named this, when they see us, how do you see? We see the oppression.
That's right.
We see the marginalization that we talked about Sunday, and it's real. But here's the question of the night. And that's why I said, when you start talking about like this, you get the pushback.
Of course.
Do we see us? Do we see how easily we turn against each other? Do we see how easily we become disloyal over disagreements? Do we see that? Do we see, I know we see the oppression. I don't mean to preach, but I got to hammer this point in for those who watch the replay. But do we see how it's so easy for me to say, oh, Darrell went to Harvard. He think he white. Why you got to be white? Because you went to Harvard. I'm just saying, I'm just giving an example. Oh, he think he all that because he a Morehouse man.
Yeah,
or he thinks she all that because she in the, see, those settle things. So I'm not impressed when we post, not us, but when people who don't see the obvious post about what the white man, let's start posting about, that's why I called my podcast today, Unity.
That's right.
You can have all the black businesses, and I'm finished. You can have all the blackouts, but if we don't unify.
That's right.
And I dealt with those principles of unity on that podcast. I said, number one, they said to one another, they didn't need a mediator. If I got issue with you, Darrell, I ain't sending an old member Bread of Life to say, tell Darrell, call me. I'm gonna pick up the phone and call you myself. And I hope you would do the same.
That's right.
See, mediation stops unity. If somebody got, holler at me, holler at your boy. Don't, I hate when people say, so-and-so said, you ain't called them. Tell so-and-so to pick up the phone and holler at me or text me.
Personally. And
that's one of the spirits that breaks unity. It says, and they said to one another. I hate, and that's a strong word, when people bring mediators when it's between me and them. Get advice, but when it's us in the room, if the issue is just between us,
that's right,
let it be you and me. Now, if I need advice on how to handle it or you need advice, I'm cool with that. But don't be showing up in no meeting with your sidekick. I'm just using this as it.
I know what you mean.
Because that interrupts our communication. Sir, you tell me what's on your mind for yourself, because Darnael Johnson gonna tell you, I don't need nobody to speak for me, because that breaks the spirit of unity. Genesis 11 said, and they said to one another, and they said to one another, let's build. And they said to one another, let's build. And they said, and I know I'm repetitive, to one another, let's build. So all of those things, we gotta turn, now I'm turning, which is gonna be a more difficult conversation, as I believe a prophetic voice, to our responsibility. We've talked enough about what's happening to us. Now let's talk about what we're doing to us. That's Darrell, that's a more difficult, and I didn't mean to block up all your time, but I had to put that out there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just wanted to respond to when you talked about J. Edgar Hoover. I would encourage people, because I think, you know, that our people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. I would encourage people to read about Cointelpro. That's the specific, and they were classified documents, but it's now declassified. And this was when the FBI was deputized to basically create dissension in the Black Power movement, because they recognized how the civil rights movement was way too much of a threat. They actually said that it was the most present threat to the American system. So I'd encourage people to read that. I would also encourage you, this is the irony, J. Edgar Hoover, there's some discussion as to whether or not, longest serving FBI director, he actually came from a Black family. He was what we would call passing. Oh, that's a whole nother thing. So when we start talking about what we do to each other, here was a Black man, but because he had been, had come through several white families, I think it was his great-grandfather that was a Black man, he was able to pass, and so he hated what he really was. But that's a whole nother, I don't even want to touch that, because that'll open up a whole nother thing. But let me say this about division. I think sometimes we get this thinking that Black people are more divided than other races, and I don't think that's the case. I just think that we have more of, it hurts us more when we're divided. See, they don't have to be united.
I think we're more emotional, though. Do you agree that we're more emotional?
We are an emotionally led people, but I think but that emotion has led to great things, and it's led to some not so great things. But I think when we start talking about, this is not a put down about, and I know you're not doing this, but I want people to understand, it's not a put down about people when we say, talk about division. It's that we don't have the luxury of being divided. We only make up 12 to 13 on a good day percentage of this nation's population. So whereas others can be divided, but still they can move through. I mean, because you look at white folk, they're as divided as the day is long. And many of them are very emotional. I mean, when I don't even want to, yeah, but I think the difference is our livelihood, our freedom, and our existence is at stake. And we unfortunately do not own the structures and systems of power that are in place in this country. So we have to be united. So I want to say that, but as we start talking about what can we do, start to learn. So many times, I don't mean just be informed, because you went to school and you got informed, but all you learned was the wrong. I mean, learn. I mean, actually begin to gain knowledge about the history of things. Because I'm telling you, Bishop, when you start learning the true history of things, it changes the whole way you see the world. You realize, we talked about this before, hey, mass incarceration didn't come out of nowhere, because a lot of it is the same structures and principles and places that were put in place after slavery. That's why under slavery, they said when the 13th Amendment came by and they said no involuntary servitude, they put a clause in there that said, unless you commit a crime. Mm-hmm. So now 100 years later, when they can lease prisoners out to companies in order to make their chairs and all that, many of these same companies won't hire the prisoner once they're released because of their background, but you'll hire them while they're in prison because you're paying them pennies on the dollar. But that's a whole nother thing. We realize where it came from. When we see some of the systems, we see even what's the hate that's coming out of the White House. This has kind of been happening. They've been using the power of the state and the arm of the state to shut us down, to sit us down. The same mechanisms that were used in September 11th, that we were so quick to say, oh, let's sign the Patriot Act. Do you know that the largest number of people who are ensnared by the Patriot Act today are not Muslims, it's not ISIS, it's not terrorists making bombs in their basement, it's Black people. They're using that to say that your child is in a gang. They're using that to say that your nephew is in a gang. And they're putting them in federal prison for 20, 30 years for that. So understand what's happening. Understand the history. Read about the laws. You know, turn off World Star Hip Hop. Turn off Instagram and start to get, because that's the other thing. And I don't want to go on, but let me just say, we like everything so quick. We want in 140 Twitter characters the answer to life. I think what Google did was messed us up, because if we can't find it in a quick Google search, we're bored. You have to begin to research below the layers and come to understand what's happened in this country. And you'll see it's not a surprise why we're at where we're at.
I agree. And I think this is healthy conversation and healthy dialogue. And I do think as we study, it's going to take people like you to help us understand some of what we read. Like you just said about the Patriot Act. Everybody wanted that passed, but it's kind of like the stingray here, where they have the legal right based on the cell towers, if they think that there is a reasonable cause to put that under your car and follow you and by cell tower, tracing by cell tower. So this is where I am, and I'll give you your closing thoughts, because I only wanted to keep us to about an hour. And I thank those who joined us. And we want to be having more conversations like this to bring solutions. And please don't misunderstand what I'm saying in this. And I think everybody interprets it based on their assignment too, and their experience with it. If you've never been on the other side of the law, I think it's very difficult for you to understand why certain people have as much passion as they have for this. But my prayer is that along with our prayer, and I made that very clear, that we have to go forth with whatever we do in the kingdom covered by intercessory prayer. But my prayer is coming out of COVID, that the church in general, I don't think it was ironic that COVID and then this political unrest. I do not think, I think It has given us a chance to focus and to have a voice. And my prayer is that as we come out of this, that the kingdom, that's the only people I can speak for, that we will begin to understand how important it is when we couldn't have church, to have sessions like this to inform our people. Not just to inform them from a spiritual perspective, but to inform them of the law. Why are some of the statues being torn down? And then should they? That's a whole nother discussion. What's the significance of renaming schools? And one of the things that I wanted to say earlier is that along with unifying, I think the next thing is, and I think this is happening, to change people, you have to rename things. Words of power. Words. So we had a leader here who got a lot of heat because he wanted to move from Black history to indigenous, I believe it was, which included everybody that wasn't. Should that happen? Some said no, some said yes. But I think as we relabel things, it will begin to change them. I think that's a part of it, because words are powerful, whatever you call. So there's the Negro, there's the African American, there's the Black, you know, which all of them, when you hear all of them, something comes to mind. The Negro brings the slave more of the slave. The African American brings more of the free working class. You know, so I do think that we do have to consider what's important to call and rename, so that that also becomes a part of changing white consciousness.
Absolutely. I agree with that, Bishop. We've been named so many things, though. I think we definitely have to, I know we don't have time to even talk about the statues and all that, which I think they all need to come down, but that's a whole nother thing. You know, you're right. It's time to cleanse the land, and it's time to start to give a new name, because that's part of the problem. That was the first thing that, you know, even the naming of us as a people, you know, it's not just what the name was that was offensive. It was the very act of naming. You know, so if you meet somebody and they say they're, you know, Italian, you can point to a country. There's no country for Negro. There's no country. There's no country for Africa, by the way, too. That's a continent. So you still aren't associated with your history. And so we've been called so many things. We went from nigger to Negro to color to Afro-American to colored again to African-American. So that also is a changing of identity and an unsurety of where you stand and where you are at the moment. And I think that brings us full circle. You know, I could say this too. It brings us full circle too. That's why your identity has to be in Christ. I don't know how you can be a Black man or a Black woman in this country and not have a relationship with the Lord. Because
absolutely,
if you pointing to everybody else to tell you who you are, every 20 years you've been called something different. So, right. So you got to be tethered and anchored to something stronger.
I just want, with all my heart, I want the church to be on the front line of this.
That's right.
Because I think for it to go in the right direction, there has to be the spiritual aspect of it. And we haven't seen that as much yet. And I don't mean the church like the civil rights church and pastors, those who are connected to Jesus, but understand the kingdom.
That's right.
And what this is all about. This has to happen. And I think we're in a good time. I think it happened at the right time. We were out of the church so we could give more attention to this. For my part, you know, and I know all of us have our part. All of us have our role to play. You know, like Shakespeare said, you find your role and you play it well. My part is to not let this, not the problem, but the issue die. And we go back to where we were. So we need voices like yours and like Sharice's on the law side and on the political side who can be the voice. I talked the other week about being a voice to the voiceless. We need these voices. We need the prayer warriors. You know, we all got our part. We need those who will never go to a protest, will never participate in a blackout, but guess what they're doing? They're interceding for us.
That's right.
They are covering us.
That's right.
So I think we all have to find out what our part is and support one another. If your part is the law, I got to support you. If somebody else's part is the intercessor, I've got to support them. If my part is to cry aloud and spare not, I need support in that. So we have to find out, because I'm going to tell you this prophetically, and I don't say that like some people just use it as a phrase. I say that when I really feel it in my spirit. Mark this down, and those of you on the Zoom, mark this down. If we don't go through this right and make the right moves and strategically unite to see things change, we're going to be back here in 2 years. I'm telling you. Yeah. If we don't go, this is our chance to get it right. We were here with Trayvon. I mean, think, every 2 years we're here. Think about it. Yeah. If y'all think about it, since Rodney King, almost every 2 to 5 years, we're here. Mm-hmm. But what happens? So the prophets have to ask, what are we not doing? That's good. What are we missing? Why do we keep being here, tearing up our cities, getting a few passive laws changed, like, okay, if possible, don't use a chokehold, if possible. But it's not law. So, Darrell, I think we got to ask these questions among ourselves, not just to those who we know that oppress us. We have to ask. I've got to ask Living Word. And we have to be uncomfortable in asking the real questions. Why do we keep getting here? Whose fault is it? It's easy to say the oppressor, right? Because that gives me an out. But what are we maybe missing? I'm not going to say not doing. So in the last 2 months, we've had, last 3 months, 5 police, Breonna Taylor, Elijah, this guy that was just, and I think it was in Akron, some part. I don't have all the names in front of me, but in the last 3 months, with all of this going on. Mm-hmm. And I think if we're going to be honest to the cause. Now, if we just, because I know a lot of people just jumping on the bandwagon, and I can tell those people, some people just protesting because they're tired of being locked down. It's just good to get out and get some air. I just be honest. Some people, that they ain't really committed to the cause. I've been shut down. I've been locked down. This is the time to get out and release all of that energy. And I understand that. And I'm not criticizing. I'm just, but we have to stay true, I believe, to this. And then have conversations like this where even if we see it differently, and those on Zoom see it differently, we're not going to allow that to become a divisive issue. We want the same thing. We may be going about it different ways. And my prayer is that we start asking us, Darnael, the question, as a pastor, as a leader, what becomes your responsibility other than use social media, other than use a podcast? What becomes your part of moving the process? Darrell, Bennett, what becomes your part? Darrell, Bennett, why do we keep getting here? What has Darnael Johnson not done that keeps us, other than blaming the oppressor, from getting here? And until we can have that honest conversation, and if we don't steward this moment that I believe God has given us, watch. In another 2 years, because here's the thing that I've been telling everybody, I don't rejoice over police arrests anymore. I'm past that. We've seen it too many times. Qualified immunity. I don't rejoice until there's been a conviction. Even getting laid off the job. Now, come on. I'm not rejoicing. I mean, I'm not saying we got the victory. See, we celebrate too quick because, like you said, we don't understand it's a process. Okay, so they got arrested. That doesn't mean a conviction. There's a long process. There's a long road, y'all. And that's why I'm saying we have to, in my opinion, stay true to the cause. Your closing comments, and I thank you for your bravery for hanging with me, because what I believe, like you, what I believe, see, you mild for them, but I've seen some of your posts and heard some of your, but thank you for hanging with me. I've said it publicly. It's hard for me to get a lot of people to have this kind of discussion because I'm fully persuaded. So I want to say thank you for your boldness and even hanging with me while we go through this. What's some of your closing remarks?
Thank you, Bishop. Well, first, thanks to everybody for just, being a part of this discussion. I think this is how it starts, having the hard discussions, understanding that, you know what, I believe we're at a watershed moment. And yes, we've seen some of this before. We saw it with Rodney King. We saw it with Trayvon Martin, but not to this level, not nationally. There's never been a moment in American history where in every single state they're protesting. They're protesting in London and New Zealand about Black Lives Movement.
Yes, Dublin.
Yeah, that's right. This is different. We're at what we call a tipping point, and we're at a place that now our forefathers fought for. And the way I would like to end, I think about there's so many parallels between the story of God's people today and the story of God's people under the iron rule of an evil Pharaoh. And God used signs and wonders to bring his people out. And what we are seeing right now are signs, and we are seeing wonders. We're seeing that even people in positions of power who are agitating things and making things worse seemingly are all a part of God's perfect plan for us to know that it is God that's going to do the deliverance. He's going to do it through people. He did it through Moses. He did it through Aaron's mouth. He did it through the fathers of Israel who did concrete things. So I'm not saying we just sit back, but we are getting the front row seat to a deliverance. This is something that our fathers and our fathers' fathers and our mothers and grandmothers who walked for miles and did not get on a bus just so that way they can bring down a system, and mothers who carried children who they were raped and they carried those children and loved them as their own, and people who had been shackled together and chained together and enslaved. They prayed to see this, and they saw the promise from afar off, but they did not receive the promise. And so we are now receiving the promise that was prayed for centuries. And I believe, what do? What we do now is what you do in this moment perhaps will be the most impactful, powerful time that you will ever have. We may not be here 20 years from now. I don't know where we'll be 40 years from now. But this is the moment for you to live with purpose, for you to live with destiny, for you to see what is it that God is calling you to do now. I mean, I'll just say personally, Bishop, I had plans. I was already planning to move overseas, and there's a lot of things in place. I told my mother recently, I said, I ain't going nowhere till we take care of this. Because there are some things that are bigger than personal success. My people have struggled and fought. And we've been called for such a time as this. And so, I did bring here, this was I shared this on the last broadcast, but I didn't show it. This is Come Back Swinging. This is my most recent book, and it's available on www.darrellbennett.com. And I wrote this book particularly for people to understand not just their history, but that you can come back from anything. And even though this is sort of my personal story of coming back, of resilience, of redemption, we are living a collective story of that. So I just want to encourage people to be mindful during this season, to not let up, and to know, and I'll end on this point, you make a difference. You may not think you do. You don't have to, go to a protest to make a difference. You make a difference just right where you are, just on your job, just on your team. You make a difference. And this is your moment to recognize that you make a difference, because collectively, you doing what you do, Bishop doing what he's doing, I'm doing what I'm doing, we're gonna make the change happen. And all flesh is gonna see it together.
All flesh.
All
And I end on that. And I've almost said to a fault, which I've backed off from saying, it's not a race thing with me. It's a justice thing.
Mm.
It's because we got some of everybody in this fight. Every nation, every tribe, every country. There are white people who are very sympathetic. I looked at an interview the other day where, I don't know, some of you all may have saw it. They interviewed these people who originally had voted for He Whom I Shall Not Name. And their daughter adopted two black. These were whites. Their daughter adopted two black kids. And so they're sympathetic now. And again, not to belabor this because we're a little bit past time. Unfortunately, though, I think that when we do feel it, it's intentional, because that's only when you have the passion for certain things. Not all, but I'm always reminded of Jesus in Hebrews. He was touched.
That's right.
With the feeling of our infirmity, yet without sin. Now you can go to him with anything because he can be touched. That's my pet peeve right there. So the things that I thought were unfortunate, God turned them around and allowed me to be touched with those things so that I can be a strong advocate for those particular things. You know, so nothing any of you have gone through has been by mistake.
Right.
Your greatest pain becomes your greatest passion.
Right.
And whatever has pained you the most, whether it's motherless, fatherless, addiction, divorce, whatever has pained you the most, that's a sign. That's what God is calling you to heal. That's where I'll leave it. So don't discount your pain. It wasn't pleasurable. It wasn't enjoyable. But it was a moment where God says, I'm calling you, because pain is the calling, not an ordination necessarily. I have a passion for this because I've been touched with this. My brother has been touched with this. I can't tell you how many times my brother, more than me, was on the other side. I've been touched with this by destiny. How else would I have the passion, Darrell Bennett, and all of those of you to be as passionate about this as I've been a victim of racism. I just told you a few. I'm touched. All right, let's pray. Thank you so much. Get his book, Come Back Swinging. It is his life story, and like all of us, don't go by what you see. He has come back swinging. When you read his story, he dug his way by God out of a dark place. And that book says we can all do it. We can and we will. So if not for yourself, for somebody that you know are going through and they're hopeless, go order that book and be encouraged. Father, tonight we thank you for giving us the courage, the strength of the Holy Spirit to try to figure some stuff out. Why none of us have all the answer. Father, we thank you for giving each one of us just a little part, just the part that we're assigned to have. So I bless those who have joined us in our conversation tonight. Continue to speak to us. Continue to give us the courage and the endurance. He that endures to the end. There's no reward in starting. The reward is in finishing. Father, we say we will finish strong. In Jesus' name. I love you all on Zoom. Darrell Bennett, I love you. Thank you so much for joining in
Thank
the
you.
conversation. We got to see where this goes, sir.
That's
We got
right.
to see where this goes. I believe we've been called for such a time as this.